Are babies born evil? Children? Is mankind born evil? Are humans born sinners? Did God murder babies? Because, well, here's the thing. I actually technically should definitely correct that, which is definitely my mistake. But it seems that this is what some people, especially atheists, believe, which is kind of the reason why I left it in there. But if you're going to ask it from my perspective, did God basically, take the lives or, kill babies because of the questions above? The reason why I make a distinction is because when you actually look up that word kill and murder in Hebrew, they're two entirely different words. And when you look at the theological consistency with it, basically you have God having the right to go ahead and give life and take life away. Therefore, God could never murder. That means you're doing something that you don't have the right to do, especially when God does things like that, killing of taking the lives of individuals because of judgment. That basically is the rule out, which God is the divine judge. He decides who stays and who goes, and he definitely has his reasons for doing those things. Totally different from murder. Completely different. So I just wanted to go ahead and actually point that out. On top of all that, God is also the one that decides, when you come here and when you go. He is, the divine judge. That's what he decides, for his own beautiful purposes. So this is one thing I really wanted to go ahead and hammer out. So with that being said, let me get started. This slide is actually here because of something that I did a while back, a few years ago, and it was called Total Depravity. So you can search for the title of this lesson on my YouTube channel, and the title of the lesson is called Total Depravity, A Second Look. So yeah, with that being said, I definitely want to go ahead and just get it started. So this came from Jaron J. Scheider. Basically, I saw this. Somebody had passed this to me, and yeah, I admit I seen this about a week ago, and I've been sitting on it for quite some time. And so I decided to simply address this because, these are things that, once again, that atheists a lot of times use. However, this is not coming from an atheist. This is coming from, a man that's been, you know, uh, basically influenced by the Reformed doctrine. And it simply says this: those that keep using the baby arguments, saying babies are innocent, please take a moment to read this and let me know whether God was unjust in what he commended or commanded here, which I already know he wasn't, because he is just and all men are guilty and have sinned. So there it is right there. For one, are babies men? Nope, they're babies. Are all babies men? No, some are women. But I get what he's saying when it says all men are sin. It's talking about everybody. So that brings up the next question. Are all babies guilty? No, no babies are born guilty. Like, that's odd. That's an odd thing to say, especially when the Bible describes babies as innocent. You can't be innocent and guilty at the same time. So already noticed that the people who wrote the Bible just didn't look at babies the same way that you do. It says all have sinned. Well, once again, have all babies sinned? No, I don't know any baby that sinned. Sorry. So, 1 Samuel 15:3, it says, now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them, but put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. He asked the question, were the babies here innocent? Anybody will tell you yes. But because, he still doesn't understand, Bible narrative and a lot of other things that I'm about to show you, this is the reason why he asked these questions. The more he would actually study the word and the context and the culture of the times and all this kind of things and the meetings and the way that the people looked at babies, he would not even ask that question. But because now I've said this before and I will say it again, like beating a worn out drum. When you look at the Bible, like Article 2, Section 5, Paragraph 4, well, yeah, you're going to go ahead and come up with these interesting questions. But when you look at the Bible as a narrative, which means that you look at it as an ongoing thing from the Old Testament to the New Testament, then all of a sudden you see like a story and a pattern and things like that. But when you look at things from just an isolated incident and you just read this, oh, look at this, well, all of a sudden you'll come up with these questions, because you're reading the Bible like it's some legal document instead of like the way that the Bible writers wrote it, an ongoing story and narrative. This is the reason why the Bible has types, right? Patterns. It points to things, symbols now, realities later. Anyway, so the question that you should really be asking is not just, are babies innocent? What about cattle? Are cattle innocent? Are sheep innocent? Are camels innocent? Are donkeys innocent? Because obviously God wanted to, go ahead and, take the life force of those things too. So why stop with the babies? See, this is what happens when you have to go ahead and take the consistency of your argument. Now, another thing that he says is, this is the true God and the true meaning of the scriptures where, quote, all have sinned, all died in Adam, all by nature are children of wrath. And after that, it just goes on, and I don't know what else it says, and that's all it is. But to me, like, that's already enough. So you could see that he's taking, a point narrative that Paul was using to talk about how all people will have sinned, and he's basically taking out the Psalms that Paul had quoted to prove and to say that all people have sinned in Romans 3. Like, Paul uses Psalms. He goes back and he decides to pull up all these Psalms, which I've seen a pulpit commentary say that even Paul goes beyond the intention of the writer, obviously, because they're all talking about, different things. And yet, one thing that they do have all in common is sin. And yet he takes this and says all sin. So what, unfortunately what Brother Jay does, he instead removes that part of Romans 3 where, Paul is actually drawing out Psalms, and he puts in this interesting little package of 1 Samuel 15:3 that says, go attack the Amalekites, destroy everybody. and this is what happens, right? I think that, now I've seen, I'm not saying that he's doing this on purpose, but I've seen Black Hebrew Israelites, pretty much do this, where they'll say, hey, I'm going to precept that, and then they'll go to some passage that has absolutely nothing to do with whatever a New Testament writer is touting out about. And they'll just say, oh, it's talking about that. Like, we don't have the right to do that. What is the New Testament writer drawing on? Psalms or 1 Samuel 15:3? Now, I know what you're saying. Well, maybe it all has something to do with that. Okay. When I'm done telling you the backstory of this whole incident as to why God would do this, you would see that it's sitting in a whole separate category and intention reason. Literally. So, with that being said, let me go ahead and continue. Oh, and of course, we would definitely say that, this does have to do with sin. I would definitely not deny that, but we're looking at the reasons and intentions behind the actions of, these people, and also the intentions behind God's judgment on them. That's what we're looking at. When you take away that narrative story, you're basically killing the whole reason that you could clearly see as to why God is doing this. And therefore, you're not going to learn the lesson behind the story because you're putting in your own narrative. See, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to tell the Bible the reason why it does stuff. You're supposed to have the Bible tell you why, stories are painting out the way they are. So with that being said, let me go ahead and continue. So today, we're going to learn about the Bible's position on babies and the real meaning behind the babies of Canaan, right? The story of Canaan and all these other things, okay? One, let's just go ahead and look at everything that we could find about, good, evil, and babies and things like that. Before I do that, definitely check the description section. I decided to upload some videos that I personally edited. Just my personal thoughts on just Calvinism in general and how I see it. I did not upload them on YouTube. Instead, they're on my Google Drive, which means when you click the link, the video will be right there, and it looks exactly like a YouTube video. All the mechanisms and controls, all that. The only thing you won't be able to do is comment unless you leave a comment on this page. Also, I have God and the Gentiles, the Canaanite religion. That is an old YouTube video that I did when I was talking about the Black Hebrew Israelites. Definitely check it out. And also, at the bottom, there is a link with plenty of material in a zip file that you can download. Definitely please click that link. Thank you. So, after the fall, all people now know of good and evil. This means that the only people that did know of good and evil were God and angels at the time, who eventually became demons. Nobody else knew about good and evil. So it says, then the Lord said, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also the tree of life, eat, and live forever. In other words, God did not want human beings to be eternally separated from him, like the fallen angels. They know good and evil and all this stuff, and so they can no longer take of the tree of eternal life, right? But look, man did not know good and evil. Almost like they're kind of innocent, like children, right? That's the way that we describe innocent. I always think of innocent as immature holiness, right? It's funny because this is the way the church fathers actually described Adam and Eve. Ain't that something? After the fall, babies do not know of good and evil. Oh, they kind of sound like Adam and Eve. Wow, isn't that something? It says this in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 39. As for your little ones, who you said would become a prey, and your children, who today have no knowledge of good or evil, they shall go in there, and to them I will give it, and they shall possess it. This sounds like that innocent people will possess the promised land. Wow. After the fall, babies were observed by their parents to see the day where they could distinguish between good and evil. Ironically, this is from Isaiah 7. Says a lot about how Jesus was innocent too, right? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. This is how God, and also through Isaiah, and essentially just human beings in general, this is how the Jews and God himself are describing children and babies bearing a son. They're not describing them as guilty. They're not describing them as sinners. Let's keep going. After the fall, babies are described by God as innocent by not knowing their right hand from their left. This comes from Jonah 4:11. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left? And also much cattle? Wow. So it says, and also much cattle. That's interesting. you know so when it comes to, like, you know babies or people being guilty, or even animals being guilty, notice that, like, nothing is said. But when it comes to, like, anything being described as innocent, it doesn't just stop at, like, babies. It also it describes animals. So at infancy stage, like, it's like none are guilty, all are innocent. Like, that lets us know the sanctity of, like, human life, right, as it starts out. Now check this out. This comes from Luke 2:23. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. Now wait just a second. So you mean to tell me that God, like, ups it a notch? I mean, it's one thing for all of us to call babies innocent, but dag, like, now God is calling babies holy. What do you do with that? Oh, they're wholly guilty. Like, see, that doesn't make sense. They're holy sinners. Like, that doesn't make sense either. So what do? Do I just go with, what the Bible actually says, that's how it's describing babies? Or do I go with, I don't know, Brother Jay, or, anyone that says a similar theology? I don't know. Maybe I should lean toward what the Bible is saying about babies over and 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 over, until the point where it's like, okay, you need to really just drop that belief. Romans 16:19. For your obedience is known to all, so that I rejoice over you. But I want you to be as wise as to what is good, and innocent as to what is evil. Innocent. That's an interesting word to use. Because so far that every time that the Bible describes people or beings that are innocent, babies seem to take the majority of that area. I mean, yeah, you'll have some men and women that are sprinkled in there, and hey, according to the text, maybe a few cattle. But yet it seems that babies seem to take the cake. So yes, it's interesting that he wants them to be innocent to the things that are evil. Kind of like how Adam and Eve started out innocent, right? Before they even knew what good and evil was. I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying too hard, right? Let me just stop. Here's some interesting memes that I found. This one comes from a reformer named Voddie Baucham. He always kind of reminds me like a T.D. Jakes of Reformed theology. He says, one of the reasons that God makes human babies small is so they won't kill their parents in their sleep. They're evil. Voddie Baucham. How about Jonathan Edwards? God not only foresaw the fall of the first man, but at his own pleasure arranged it. That's the thing. I don't understand why people say that, they always have to add pleasure to, like, what God is doing in these things. Like, it doesn't seem to me that God would be pleased to do something like that. He's not even pleased with the death of the wicked. And if you try to go to the verse in Isaiah 53 where it says, well, it pleased the Lord to bruise him, just to remind you, that is from the Hebrew Masoretic from, like, the 9th century. The only text that they had of Isaiah 53 was Septuagint, and it says the exact opposite. It said it pleased the Lord to purge him of his stroke, which means that that version of Isaiah 53 did not exist in the days of Jesus or the early church. Interesting. You should look into these things. Anyway, he said God did decree, or God did from all eternity, will or decree all the sins of the world. Jonathan Edwards. So you have John Calvin, Jonathan Edwards, Voddie Baucham. But yet I could read in my Bible where it says, verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as these little children that Voddie Baucham thinks is evil, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Right. That makes so much sense. If babies are evil, somehow they seem to occupy heaven. I don't know. Let's see. Whoever causes one of these little ones to who believe to stumble. Now that's interesting. Children. He's describing like little children. Whoever causes them to stumble. Well, if God is going to decree all the sins of the world, and He arranged the fall of the first man, I wonder, He's arranging by His decree all the sins of the world. Well, it sounds like the theology that Calvinism touts out is a God that causes little children to stumble, which totally goes against what Jesus is saying. I'm going to take a pit stop here before I continue. I once said that if you actually look in James chapter 1, just read the whole chapter. When you get to verse about 13, I want you to key in and just keep on reading. And James says something that says, hey, you know what? All good things come from God, and He's the Father of lights, and there's no shadow of turning in Him. There's no darkness in Him. And after that, he says, when people are tempted, when man's tempted, he's tempted by his own lust, and he's drawn away by his own desire. Right? And after that, it says, it gives birth to death and sin and stuff. When it comes to compatibilism, read on monergism.com for yourself. Like, that's as Calvinistic as you can get. They believe in something called compatibilism, which was not started by a Christian, but it was started by a philosopher. And doesn't the Bible say that, you're not supposed to trust in like vain philosophy and philosophies of men and traditions and all that stuff of men, and right? It says that. But yet, they don't have any problem with like taking a view that was started by some non-Christian philosopher, just somebody who came up with some stuff. I just find it funny. But yeah, when you look at it, it just means that God basically determines the desires of human beings to the point where they will do what He decreed. If that's how God is like, interacting and manipulating human beings, I would definitely call that manipulation. It's like, well, if that's the case, then when the Bible says that, well, this person was drawn away by their own lust and their own desire, you have to ask, was that their own lust? Was that their own desire? Was it? According to, Calvinism, you really have to ask that question. Like, where did that desire come from? Oh, it came from evil. Well, who like determined that person to desire the evil, and also who determined that evil should come to that person in order to be determined their desires to desire evil? Like, when you look at compatibilism and look at what James is saying, like, it just does not match. You can go to Galatians 2:17. Check it out for yourself. Galatians 2:17. I remember it saying something like, is Christ therefore the minister of sin? God forbid. Okay, so if Christ is not the minister of sin, then God wouldn't be the author of sin. But yet, this is like what Calvinists believe. Oh, and here's the real kicker. It says God forbid. So, according to Calvinism, the author of sin is forbidding his son to be the minister of sin. That just doesn't make sense. Like, I mean, there's even another one. I forget it. I think it's in like Galatians 5, where, Paul is saying, you did run well. He said, who did hinder you that you should no longer obey the truth? This persuasion does not come from the one who called you. Well, according to Calvinism, I guess it kind of did. I mean, where's it going to come from anyway? I mean, what other place? I mean, like, you really have to wonder, like, I mean, it's sad. It really is. I don't understand how people could look at the Old Testament and the New Testament and conclude that, like, it was, like, a reformed theology. And it's not at all. So I hope that these simple things really do help. I don't know how I got out there. I need to come on back here. So let me come on back. I could have said way more, but I'm done ranting. It says, it would be better for him if with a heavy millstone hung around his neck, he had been cast into the sea. Mark 9:42. In other words, if anyone causes these little ones to stumble, it's better for that to happen to them. This is Jesus talking. I mean, Lord forbid that, the Father would fit any such category. But in Reformed theology and Calvinism, like, you really do have to ask these questions. Like, and they're just right there. So, like, Jesus is saying things. It's like, well, Jesus, I think you miss Article 2, Section 9. Like, you might not want to say that because it'll rub knuckles against, a theology that came from the Gnostics. But anyway, so it's funny because when you actually look in Psalms 51:5, this is one of the passages that people use to say babies are sinners. And yet look at what it says. It says, behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. That's interesting. So it seems that in sin did David's mother conceive him. Why on earth would conceiving be a sin if God is the one who made, sex and reproduction? Oh, maybe it's because it could have possibly been outside of marriage. So that's the reason why it's in sin. I could be wrong, though, but hey, it also says, I was shapen in iniquity. Okay, once again, like, iniquity is not a thing to be shaped in. Like, he's speaking poetically here. How do I know this? Look at Acts 2, verse 8. Like, this is the way that the Jews talk. And how do we hear, each in our proper dialect in which we were born? So you were born inside of a dialect. You were born inside of a language? No, you weren't. You were born around people who were speaking that language, just like David was born around people who were sinning. It's really that simple. Let's stop making it difficult. Let's stop making it difficult, please. Do you know how many verses that I've found throughout the Psalms that shows, like, people speaking figuratively like this and poetically like this? Oh, but that's right. That, legal type of people. No, like, they were poets as well. Anyway, it says this in the Septuagint version. For behold, I was conceived in iniquities. Oh, so I guess he was conceived in multiple places. Nope, I guess not. And in sins, it's plural. Did my mother conceive me? Right. So now we got the Greek Septuagint, saying this in a quite different way than the Hebrew Masoretic that wasn't around back then. This is the reason why no one believed these passages the way that Brother Jay is looking at them. Something to think about. Septuagint was written in 200 BC. It's transliteration from Hebrew to Greek from a Hebrew text that we no longer have. We just lost it. But yet we do have its remainder of, the Greek version of it. And this is what it says. How about Psalm 71:6? Look at this. Upon you I have leaned from before my birth. Wow, so before he was even born, right, before he came out the womb, this person that was shapen in iniquities was actually leaning on the Lord. Okay. You are he who took me from my mother's womb. My praise is continually before you. Oh, so when he was born, he's saying, you know what? You had me from the moment I was born, Lord. That's why my praise is continually before you. Because we was always together. Wow. That's an interesting way to paint someone who's born guilty or born a sinner. How about a Septuagint version? On thee have I stayed from the womb. I have been stayed. Wow. In other words, God kept him from the womb. From the belly of my mother, thou art my protector. Doesn't it say, God is like a protector of the innocent? Or no way. I think that's what we say these days. Yeah. of thee is my praise continually. Now, Brother Jay had said in his response video of, or the natural born, or the natural state of man, or something like that. You could look it up. And in a video, he says even babies are simple. And from there, he actually quotes Psalms 58:3, which makes it even worse. He says, "The wicked are estranged from the womb; they go astray from birth, speaking lies." um, Go astray as soon as you're born, right? Not that they were born that way. It's a big distinction, isn't it? How can one be born lost and go astray when they are already astray? See, that doesn't make sense. You cannot go off course if you already are. It doesn't make sense. They go astray from birth, speaking lies. I've never heard, a newborn baby, all the way from like 6 months. Like, I've never heard a baby go beyond the calls of wah wah wah. I haven't. I haven't heard any baby speaking lies. Have you guys? I haven't. You know. So I just don't understand. Like, so what do you do with that? So anyway, I just wanted to show those things. Now, here are some questions for Brother Jay. Can you name one sin that babies commit? Why did Jesus say the kingdom of heaven belongs to little children? Matthew 19:14. Where in the Bible does it show a baby committing sin? If babies are born in sin, why did Ezekiel say each man is responsible for his own sin actions, not those of his father, and vice versa? It's Ezekiel 18, verse 19 and 20. Why did Moses say basically the same thing as Ezekiel in Deuteronomy 24:16? Why, if babies are born in sin, did Job say if he had died at birth, he would have been at rest? Job 3:11 to 13. If humans are born in sin, Jesus was 100% human. How then was Christ sinless? If babies are born in sin, and I keep putting that on quotation marks because I've never seen that in the Bible. How was Paul ever alive apart from the law at one time? In Romans 7:9, it doesn't make sense. This kind of gets into the whole thing about, kind of reminds me of other things that Paul said. He said, God justifies the ungodly, but if you believe that regeneration comes first and then faith comes next in believing, and then you're saved, then how is somebody still considered ungodly if they're regenerated before they believe and before they're saved? That doesn't make sense. I mean, the Bible says God justifies the ungodly, right? And this is something that Jacob Arminius had noticed. And this is one of the first things that he noticed as a reason why he, that's basically denied Calvinism. Anyway, it says, why did Jesus say the kingdom of heaven belongs to little children? Again, Matthew 19:14. I had to put that in there twice. Also, it says this: behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Joel 3:19. One must ask, is sin a gift from the Lord? Answer, no. No. I'm trying to be as plain as possible. This is what the Bible says, and this is what, Brother Jay is saying, and Calvinist. So, God is the creator of our composition and constitution. He's the creator of our bodies. And since God is holy and doesn't want us to be sinful, he certainly would not create us out of some type of sinful substance. Otherwise, Job would be blaming God for his sinful condition by saying to him, quote, and this is like, This is what it would sound like if, if this stuff was true. It would say something like this: Thine hands have made me and fashioned me altogether sinfully. Thou hast made me of sin. Thou hast clothed me with a sinful substance, and fenced me with an evil constitution. Now, you read Job chapter 10, verses 8 through 11, and you tell me what it really says. I'm showing you what it would say if, what Brother Jay believes is true. Right? Because, they seem to put an emphasis that sin is like a substance or a thing and it could be contracted like some disease, instead of like something that's committed. It's not contracted. Anyway, Job will be saying that men are sinful, not for choosing to break God's law, but for being created by God himself. But then again, these are the same people that say God is the author of sin. But yet they're saying that God is like without sin. And they're saying that God did not create sin. But yet, nothing comes into existence without or apart from his decree or something like that, which is once again totally not true at all. And all of a sudden there's the famous verse of Ephesians 2, chapter 1, verse 3. And basically it's the whole thing. By nature, children of wrath, right? And of course, notice it never said by birth. It's saying by nature, by your character. There's two types of definitions for nature, and based on how the Bible speaks, it's harping on the second one, which is the nature of your character, which is formed and developed by the decisions that you make throughout your life. It's funny because in the Greek, you know what character means? In the Greek, it means engraved. Something that you constantly engrave at, kind of like a molder molding something. Same thing that happens to your brain when you begin to think. It creates these grooves in your brain to the point where all of a sudden your brain looks like macaroni. Same thing. Interesting, isn't it? So let me go ahead and continue. If you look in Matthew 18:3, Matthew 19:14, it'll say things where Jesus is saying, hey, let the children come to me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. I've seen verses and translations where it says, for such reign in the kingdom of heaven. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to these verses here. I'm going to go to Romans 2:14. I'm going to go to all of them right now. So let me go ahead and show you what all these verses say. So let's go ahead and pull this up. And no, I'm going to keep it on my screen, okay? Because I know that time is short. So this is all the stuff that this says. And it says it right here. Let me pull this up. Okay, here we go. It says here in Matthew 18:3. And truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 18:3. But Jesus said, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 19:14. For when Gentiles, who do not have the law, by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. Romans 2:14. Gives a whole different take on the whole by nature children of wrath, doesn't it? Doesn't seem to be talking about birth. Seems to be talking about something that you inherently know to be true or false. And if you decide to do that false thing, then all of a sudden, it's not going to look good for you. Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? 1 Corinthians 11:14. So, notice how the word nature is being used in that context. How about this one? We ourselves are Jews by nature and not Gentile sinners, right? And that's Galatians 2:15. And then finally you have Galatians 4:8. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved by those that by nature are not God's. By their very composition are not God's. In other words, they were enslaved by idols. Last time I checked, idols weren't born, were they? They were made. They were fashioned. And yet, this is the contextual usage of this word when they use it. So, just wanted to point that out. Anyway, back to the slide. So when you look at the whole, part 2 or verse 2, it puts in context of verse 3. Notice if verse 2 says, children of disobedience, not birth of disobedience. No, children, right? When you do wrong instead of doing right, you know what I mean? And you know what's going on. Also, it says, who are wrongly using their constitutions, who are choosing to walk in a manner of life that is forbidden and selfish, thereby creating for themselves a wicked character. It does not mention Adam's sin, or us inheriting the guilt of Adam. They were dead because of sins in which they once walked. Verse 2. And conducted themselves in the lusts of the flesh. Verse 3. Like, this is what it's talking about. Have you read chapter 1? It's talking about, hey, you know what? Before you were saved, this is what you were like. After you're saved, this is what you're like now. So that's what it means by children of wrath. He's not even at all talking about actual babies born. He doesn't even mention the word birth. Notice that. And when it talks about the word nature, everything in the passage is screaming about a person's character that they form. So that's what it's talking about. Before you're saved, this is what you were like, right? You were children of wrath. This is the reason why in John 1, look at this. I think it just popped in my head. Didn't it say that, that God gave those who believe the power to become children of God? But yet these are like grown men and women. But yet they're being described now as children of God. So just look at the way that the Bible is speaking. But once again, when you already have a legalistic presupposition that's totally separate from the mindset and cultural context of the people that write this stuff, then of course you're going to look at it in ways that they're not even talking about. So what the verse proves is that, one, it contradicts inherited depravity and proves that people sin because of their own conduct. And two, nature in the text refers to a person's character, which comes because of repeated practice, not by inheritance. Calvinism doesn't make sense, and they could care less. Why do I say this? Because I'm going to show you something that R.C. Sproul had wrote. And then after that, I'll get into the main portion of this video. I think this comes from Chosen by God. I'm not sure. But it comes from something that R.C. Sproul had wrote, the late R.C. Sproul. He says this: God's creatures with a blah, 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 no, nor have I found anyone yet who does know. So they seem to be a little confused on something here. Let's find out what it is. In spite of this excruciating problem, and I bet it is, and here's the thing, it really shouldn't be a problem because I thought everything was done for God's glory. Why would they have a problem with that? Anyway, in spite of this excruciating problem, we still must affirm that God is not the author of sin. So this is interesting. Brother J and especially K-Dub say that God is the author of sin. And yet R.C. Sproul says he's not. The Bible does not reveal, and I mean, unless R.C. Sproul changes his mind later on or something, I don't know. The Bible does not reveal the answers to all of our questions. It does reveal the nature and character of God. Yes, I agree. Yes, it does. One thing is absolutely unthinkable. God could be the author or doer of sin. But this chapter is about God's sovereignty. We are still left with the question that, given the fact of human sin, how does it relate to God's sovereignty? If it is true that in some sense God foreordains everything that comes to pass, which is not true, then it follows with no doubt that God must have foreordained the entrance of sin into the world. So I guess they're going to say that God foreordained sin, but he's not the author of sin. Even though he, it says that, that God is the author and finisher of our faith, he's the author of that. Doesn't say he's the author of anything else. I guess the Bible writers just weren't too fond of saying that God was the author of everything. But if he foreordained your faith and he's the author of that, well, if you're going to say he foreordained sin, and according to your theology, you're saying something that the Bible just doesn't say. Matter of fact, it says the opposite. I mean, in so many indirect and somewhat direct ways, based on Galatians 2:17, James 1:13, and all that other stuff I was talking about when I was talking about compatibilism. Rewind the tape. All right, let's continue. This is not to say that God forced it to happen or that he imposed evil upon his creation. All that means is that God, in his wisdom, must have decided to allow it to happen. That's interesting because last time I checked, I looked at R.C. Sproul's quotes and he says, the only thing that God allowed is the thing that he decreed. So that's the only allowing he, allowed to happen. Like he decreed it to happen. And yet he's saying something else in his book here, I guess, a little time later, I guess. It says, if he did not allow it to happen, then it would not have happened. Else, he is not sovereign. So that's interesting. He's saying that, if there's something that God doesn't allow to happen, that God isn't sovereign. That's the thing. Like, there are tons of things that happen on this planet that God is not behind. He would say things like, look, I didn't command this. This didn't come into my mind, right? So I don't know. But I guess in a sense, I do see what he's saying, because he's saying, well, God is basically the one that is in control. And in that sense, whatever goes on in this life, he allows it to happen because he is the one that could ultimately stop it. And he's saying that if there is something that, that happened that God just did not allow, then that means there's something outside of his control. And because of that, God is not sovereign. And that I would agree, because God is in control. The difference between a non-Calvinist and a Calvinist is that, and this is the hairline splitter, so everyone listen closely. A Calvinist will say God controls everything. Even though they would hate to say that. But yet they'll say things like he foreordains everything. He decrees everything. But they just don't like how it sounds. When they say God controls everything, they won't say that. God controls everything. A non-Calvinist basically says God is sovereign because he's in control of everything. If you're controlling everything, you're really not allowing things to happen, are you? No, you can't have it both ways. So that's the thing. There is no such thing as allowing anything to happen, because he's controlling everything. Therefore, nothing just happens on any kind of allowance. Now, of course, in the Bible, we see this clearly. But once again, their theology seems not to like going with the Bible a lot of times. It's just like, embrace the contradiction and call it a mystery. No, a mystery means like we just don't know. A contradiction means like we see it. We know it because we see it. Like, that's white and that's black. We know that God is sovereign because we know that God is God. Okay. Therefore, we must conclude that God foreordained sin. Wait a minute. He just said that we know that God could, let's see, it'd be unthinkable that God be the author of sin. But we conclude that God foreordained sin. Okay, so he's not the author of it, but he foreordained it. Just like you would say he's the author and finisher of your faith, and you would say he, foreordained your faith. I don't know. It sounds like you're picking and choosing things. Like I don't know. What else can we conclude? Well, I concluded some things. We must conclude that God's decision to allow sin to enter the world was a good decision. So now you're judging God's decisions. Last time I checked, sin entering the world was not a good thing. Anything that God created was good. Remember Genesis? Let's take it back, children. God created the plants. That was good. God created man. That was good. He said that was very good. Yeah, for you to say that it was a good thing. See, I'm not going to judge that. See, here's the thing. God allows things to happen. It does not mean that those things in and of themselves were good. Sin was not a good thing that entered into the world. That's why sin entered into the world through man. Now, did God allow man to go ahead and make his own choice? Yes. But it was man that allowed sin into the world. He was the one that did that. God, in any allowance in any of the sense, was allowing man to make the decision. God was not backing his decision of having sin coming into the world, and therefore you cannot say that God allowed sin into the world, because you would basically be saying it in the sense that God backed it all up. Meanwhile, we see God doing things around what man is doing, not encouraging him in doing the wrong thing. You see God making like a lot of, he's like, he knows what's going to happen. So he does all these things to become the cure. So I don't know. It's just, I see God working around the follies of men. So in that sense, you cannot say that God allowed sin to enter the world in that sense, because you would say that God is just backing sin. Like that's not the way to look at it. This is not to say that our sin is really a good thing, but merely that God's allowing us to do sin, which is evil, is a good thing. So you're saying that, okay, now, bro, you're saying that God allowing us to do sin is a good thing? And here's the thing. Once again, in the sense that you're using the word allow, like it doesn't even compute or apply based on God's actions. Like God works around the sins of men. He does not induce them. I mean, the closest that you get in God, doing anything is when God decided to judge Pharaoh. And so he said, okay, I'm going to teach you a lesson. And so because God was judging Pharaoh, he began to strengthen his heart, stiffen his heart, harden his heart. He done all this stuff with his heart. And even then, you read the passages, he still did the opposite of what God intended him to do at times, which was pretty odd. But it goes to show that whoever wrote Genesis, Moses and things like that, they were not Calvinists. So, I don't know. It's like you see God judging people, saying, okay, I'm going to make a lesson out of you. Like, it's judgment. That's way different than, every single solitary human being being scripted by God to do every single thing on the planet. Like, no, you don't find that. You don't find that in the Bible at all. You find God laying blame to man for what they did, for what he commanded them not to do. You know how many times you find that in the Bible? Google that one day. Command not. See how many times that pops up. Anyway, God's involvement in all this is perfectly righteous. What? See, this is a part where it just contradicts the Bible. Because basically, this is what they're saying about their, compatibilism. God is the one who seeds within you the desire to do evil. And yet he's saying when God does that, it's perfectly righteous. Even though it says in James that that desire comes from you and it doesn't come from God. It comes from your own desire. It comes from you, nowhere else. And when that seed is there and it conceives sin and sin brings forth death, like that's what it's doing. But, with Calvinism, it's saying, well, God put that little seed of sin in you to go ahead and germinate and desire to do that bad stuff. And James finishes it off by saying, when all that is come to pass, all that stuff and the sin and all that, it brings forth death. That would mean that God is the author of death and sin. Our involvement in it is wicked. Well, yeah, I agree with that. But, who's the one behind our involvement? That you're saying that in him doing that is perfectly righteous. Like, that's weird. Isaiah chapter 10 says, woe unto those who decree unrighteous decrees, which once again goes to show that these people were not Calvinists when they wrote this stuff. They were Old Testament Jews. The fact that God decided to allow us to sin does not absolve us from our responsibility for sin. Well, what about it absolving God of? I mean, don't stop it with man. What about him? Because according to your theology, he played a direct role in it. Compatibilism, determinism, determining the compatibilist sin, foreordaining decree. So I just, it's amazing. It's like a blind spot. So, God is absolved from the fact that he decided to allow us to sin, and not just any kind of allow. Like, I'm talking like foreordained, decreed, compatibilistically determine your desire to do exactly what he decreed to do, for you to do in the first place, which pretty much makes Satan useless at this point. It really makes you wonder, like, I've heard of the phrase that, Satan wants everybody to be with him, but God only wants some to be with him, according to Calvinism. But yet, if we go ahead and look at compatibilism, we have to ask a question, like, well, is Satan compatibilistically controlled by God too? And if he is, then that means that whatever Satan desires, that's really not coming from him. That desire was, as monergism.com says, it was determined, was determined into him. Which means that if we look at Satan, we really got to ask a question. Like, how would he really feel about us if God didn't, compatibilistically determine his desires to want to do all this stuff to us, according to monergism.com and compatibilism anyway? We have to ask the question, who's doing the compatibilizing? Well, God is, according to Reformed theology. So if that's the case, then I guess it's God's desires that really desire us to not be with him. I mean, to be with Satan and not be with it. It's like Satan has just moved out the way at this point. Even though the Bible says that he desires all to be saved. Maybe I'll make a video on that, because there's a clear refutation to that by Cabane52. He's an Eastern Orthodox Christian. All right, so we're gonna go ahead to the main portion of this hangout. What we're gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys the real reason behind why God did what he did with Canaan. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look. Let's see. Okay, here it is. Now, what I'm going to be reading to you guys, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but these guys are great. I don't know who they are, but they seem to get the narrative down. And you know how I am about narrative. And yeah, when it comes to, my new position I'm trying to make called narratism. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. This comes from evidenceunseen.com. What about the Canaanite genocide? Atheist Richard Dawkins considers the war over Canaan to be one of the most morally atrocious aspects of the Old Testament. In his book, The God Delusion, he writes, the biblical story of Joshua's description of Jericho, and the invasion of the Promised Land in general is morally indistinguishable from Hitler's invasion of Poland, or Saddam Hussein's massacre of the Kurds and the Marsh Arabs. The Bible may be an arresting and poetic work of fiction, but it is not the sort of book you should give to your children to form their morals. As it happens, the story of Joshua and Jericho is the subject of an interesting experiment in child morality. Comes from The God Delusion, from atheist Richard Dawkins. The reason why I read it in like the English accent is because he is English and he has an English accent. He's from the UK, so I can't help it. I'm an actor. So how do we understand God's commandment to utterly destroy the people of Canaan in Deuteronomy 7:2? He instructed the kings of Israel to completely destroy the entire Amalekite nation, men, women, children, babies, cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and donkeys. I guess they were guilty too, right? 1 Samuel, how could this possibly be oh, you know what? That's another thing too. When you look up the word clean and unclean in the Old Testament Hebrew, you will find two words. One, you'll find tahir, which, you know, Tahar gets his name, and it means clean, to be ceremonially clean, right? Which could be applied to cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys, which means unclean can be applied to them. So in the Hebraic sense, those things were unclean, right? Let me see. You know, basically for their idolatry, right? But they weren't unclean in and of themselves, right? So how could this possibly be compatible with the God who is loving and compassionate to all people? The Canaanites were sadistic and depraved. If one of your neighbors, oh my gosh, y'all need to look at what I dug up in my God and the Canaanites, the Canaanite religion video. You guys need to look that up and see what I did. Just look at it. It is a documentary version type, so it's very poetic and stuff and vision driven. Check it out. I can confirm everything these guys are saying. It says, if one of your neighbors was acting like a Canaanite, you'd lock your door and call the cops. Canaanite culture was thoroughly depraved and guilty and was guilty of barbaric acts such as burning down or as burning newborn babies alive, corporate rape, and murder. Deuteronomy explains, quote, they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire of their gods. Deuteronomy 12:31. Harvard scholar G. Ernest Wright explains. Worship of these gods, Baalism, carried with it some of the most demoralizing practices in existence. Among them were child sacrifice, a practice long since discarded in Egypt and Babylonia, sacred prostitution, and snake worship on a scale unknown among other peoples. John Wayham writes, Molech sacrifices offered especially in connection with vows and solemn promises, and children were sacrificed as the harshest and most binding pledge of the sanctity of a promise. It is not surprising that the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, where Molech worship was practiced in the days of Manasseh, should have provided the Jewish image of hell. This is very true. Look at what Michael Heiser has dug out. It's funny because I dug this out myself. You know, when you look, Heiser begins to explain, when you look at the passages, which I've actually shown myself, if you look at the Greek Septuagint, it says the valley of the Titans. Ain't that something? The Titans, the ones that fell to the gods and were locked up in the middle of the earth in gloomy chains. Sounds like Peter, doesn't it? The angels that fell during the time of Noah or whatever, and they're locked up in gloomy chains that await their judgment. Sounds like that the Greek mythology was right about something. That's a whole nother story. So when you look at the Greek Septuagint, it does say valley of the Rephaim, valley of the Titans. The Rephaim were a group of people that Joshua destroyed, and the Rephaim were basically offspring of, the Nephilim, fallen angels. He destroyed them. They often say in every Jewish tradition that when they died, their spirits roamed around that valley, and those spirits became the demons of the New Testament. And yet this is the same place. It's being called Gehenna, which is being called hell, which is being called Hades by the book of Revelation. Do you see the pattern? Oh, but when you look at the Bible like it's Article 2, Section 5, none of this stuff matters. The ancient world and their context doesn't matter to a 16th century lawyer who was saved in 1533 and wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion 2 years later in 1535. I don't know anyone that can just be saved and just jump up and just be like, oh, I'm going to write a book about Christianity. Like, no, bruh, you've been saved for 2 years. Sit under a pastor. Anyway, scholar Clay Jones explains, Moloch was a Canaanite underworld deity represented by an upright bull-headed idol with human body in whose belly a fire was stoked, and in those whose outstretched arms a child was placed that would be burned to death. And it was not just infants. Children as old as 4 were sacrificed. A bronze image of Kronos. Wow. Isn't Kronos the god of time or something like that? Matter of fact, Kronos was a guy that ate 12 of his children, and he had a son named Zeus, but he didn't know that he had that son. And Zeus came and gave him a rock that was fashioned like bread, caused him to throw up all 12 or 13 of his brother and sister gods, and then they fought Kronos, locked him up in the middle of the earth. Watch Clash of the Titans if you don't believe me. Anyway, a bronze image of Kronos was set up among them, stretching out his cupped hands above a bronze cauldron, which would burn the child. As the flames burning the child surrounded the body, the limbs would shrivel up, and the mouth would appear to grin as if laughing, until it was shrunk enough to slip into the cauldron. Oh my God, oh my gosh, I can't even read this stuff. I can't even read this. God help me. Help me. Lord. Like, what the gosh. The Bible tells us that the destruction of the Canaanites was not just a racial judgment. God explicitly stated that these people were to be executed because of the horrific sadistic actions of babies. So you mean to tell me that God didn't want these babies going through that stuff, and he didn't want them growing up to commit this same stuff to other babies, which is perhaps the logical reason why he said kill the babies? But dude, because you don't read the Old Testament and you don't want to see the story behind the reason why God is even doing this stuff, you want to lay it all to some election of all right, anyway. If the Jewish people did these same things, God promised the same punishment for them. Wow. Wow. If they were allowed to coexist, God explained that the Canaanite culture would eventually ruin them if they intermingled with it. And I'm pretty sure that, this ungodly practice would continue now, wouldn't it? So God wanted to make sure it wouldn't do it anymore. Sense of why he said kill the babies. And it's funny because when he ends up doing it, they go with him. Now, of course, the ones that the men killed, we know those babies went to God anyway, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, in addition, the Canaanites were the ones who first attacked the straggling Jews rather than the other way around. One of the Canaanite people groups, the Amalekites, attacked the Jews while they were traveling in the wilderness, Ezekiel 17. In fact, they repeatedly attacked the Israelites, trying to pick off the faint and the weary stragglers. Sounds like the devil, doesn't it? A reference to weak Jewish people, children of the elderly. When the Jews were weak, the Canaanites tried to wipe them out. John Wenham notes, quote, ancient armies in the territory did not hold captives. Dang, they didn't even hold any captives. These people are brutal, and they defeated them totally. There would have been no mercy for the Jewish people. The Nazis tried to wipe out the Jewish race in the 20th century. No one batted an eye at countermeasures. And yet, clearly, these nations were trying to do exactly the same thing, albeit over 3 millennia later. Instead of using, gas chambers and furnaces, the Canaanites would have used swords and spears, but the result would have been the same. If God hadn't commanded war, the Jews would have been exterminated. It was kill or be killed. And in this theological context, it was, kill them or they will murder you. Therefore, the war with the Canaanites was not the destruction of an innocent group of people. It was a corporate capital punishment of a sick, twisted, and barbaric culture. If a modern man was caught perpetrating any of these acts, few would bat an eye at his death sentence. While the destruction of the Canaanites was a severe judgment, their sin was equally severe, if not more. Their sin was more severe. The Jews usually didn't fight offensive wars, only defensive. Wow, isn't that something? Sounds like God doesn't go looking for trouble. The Jews were not permitted to conquer anyone they wanted. In fact, when they tried to conquer people without divine approval, they were utterly defeated. 1 Samuel, Numbers 14, Joshua 7. God was clearly calling the shots on the destruction of Canaan, not the Jews. The king was beneath God, not above him. Moreover, after the war with Canaan, God did not command any other offensive wars in Israel. Even during the time Israel's wars were usually defensive. Exodus 17, Numbers 21, Deuteronomy 3, Joshua 10, Numbers 31. Copen writes, all sanctioned Yahweh battles beyond the time of Joshua were defensive ones, including Joshua's battle to defend Gibeon, Joshua 10 and 11. Of course, while certain offensive battles took place during the time of the judges and under David and beyond, these are not condemned as ideal or exemplary. God wasn't playing favorites. Throughout the Bible, we see that God cares about all people. Even the Moabites were utterly evil. God shows compassion upon them. Isaiah 15 and 16. And also, note Jeremiah chapters 46 to 51, where he says he's going to restore the fortunes of Moab after he gets done punishing them just like he punished Israel with the same Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar. Even though, you can read this yourself. Jeremiah chapters 46 through 51. Read it yourself. Even though the Assyrians and Egyptians oppressed the Jews, God refers to them as my people. Isaiah 19. That was a healing chapter of Egypt. Read about it. Repeatedly throughout the Old Testament, we see that God loves the foreigner. Leviticus 19, Deuteronomy 10. He doesn't show preferential treatment. Even in predicting the destruction of the Canaanites, we see the same impartiality in God's character in Deuteronomy 19. Look at what it says. Hear, O Israel, you are crossing over the Jordan today to go in and possess the nations greater and mightier than you. Great cities fortified to heaven. A people great and tall. Fortified to heaven. That kind of sounds like the Tower of Babylon. A people great and tall. Tall. Kind of sounds like Anyway. Do not say in your hearts, when the Lord your God has driven them out before you, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me into this land. Because it is of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. Oh, so God is saying, because they're wicked, I'm kicking them out. Which presupposes if they weren't so wicked, he'd probably let them stay and perhaps let them convert. Right? Circumcision, become a Jew, Let me see. Oh yeah, here it is. Driving out before you in order to confirm the oath which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. Know then, it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stubborn people. So, God acknowledged that the Jews were a stubborn people, and yet he wanted to use the nation of Israel to bring a blessing to the world. And it shows that a lot of times in the Bible. Okay, I'm not going to quote all that. If Israel had been destroyed, this would have disrupted God's plan for bringing blessing through the Messiah. Therefore, God's chosen Jewish people not to suppress others, but ultimately to bless others. God gave the Canaanites an opportunity to change. What? Wow. Let's read the main part that I wanted to read this whole time. God waits patiently for all people to turn to him, and he remains slow to anger. Exodus 34, Psalms 103. God had compassion on the Ninevites, relenting from judgment because they did not know the difference between their right and left hand. Kind of sounds like children, doesn't it? Jonah 4:11. In Ezekiel, we read that God takes no pleasure in the judgment of the wicked, Ezekiel 33. In Jeremiah, God says that he will relent from judgment if the wicked will merely change their minds. At one moment, I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to pull down, or to destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the calamity I planned to bring on it. Jeremiah 18:7-8. If these men would have changed, God would not have judged them. In fact, God allowed the Jews to rot in slavery for 400 years so that the Canaanites had an opportunity to change. He didn't judge them immediately because the sins of the Canaanites did not yet warrant their destruction. Genesis 15:13. That is, they were not past the point of no return. However, by the time the Jews came for battle, they were. That's the reason why they acted the way they did. In other words, you could sin to the point where, hey, you know what? Sin really does have, just slavery, slave over you and things like that, where God would just give you over. Okay, after a while, it's like, all right, look, fine. If this is what you want to do, then you let that sin be your God. So you mean to tell me that while they were praying to God, God, please deliver us, God was over there like, hey, look, get it together, y'all. Get right. He was talking to the Canaanites. Get right, y'all. Hey, I'm trying to tell y'all. And also, if you look, Sodom and Gomorrah was like a part of Canaan. Did you know that? Did you know that? And so finally, after 400 years, he said, you know what, Dag, I'm trying to get y'all to get right. Fine. And so he goes over into Egypt and he, uproots the Israelites. And he goes ahead and has them take over their spot. That is the narrative of the God of the Bible. Sounds real different from, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and do as I please, and I'm going to go ahead and punish these people over here and do this over there. I'm not going to go ahead and do anything for any kind of moral reason that would display my righteous character. I'm not going to do it for that so that people can see who I am. No, I'm not going to do it for that. I'm just going to do it because I'm God, and this is the way that Calvinism depicts me. Because they read things not like a narrative to see the reason behind the story, which reveals the character of God. No, they read it like Article 4, Section 5. This is what this part says. And I'm totally going to misinterpret and not care about the context and the reason behind why it's saying it. During this 400-year period, the Canaanites knew that God was coming for them. God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, which were cities filled with Canaanites. By the time Jews stood at the border ready to fight, Rahab told them that they had heard of God's judgment of Egypt. Joshua 2 and Joshua 9. Therefore, the Canaanites defiantly ignored these serious warnings. In other words, kind of sounds like Romans 1. Yeah, they knew the truth, but they suppressed it in unrighteousness. They traded the worship of God for the worship of forfeited beast and bull-headed humans that sacrifice children. Yeah, sounds like them. And because of that, I guess after 400 years, God gave them over to be fill in the blank. Yeah, starting to make sense now, isn't it? Oh, that's the reason why Paul was talking about that in Romans 1. Makes sense, doesn't it? Besides just saying, oh, these people are depraved. Like, nope. Diplomacy was the usual method. When Israel would go to war with any other nation, they would usually offer a peace treaty first. Deuteronomy 20:10 says, when you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If the people surrendered, they were not harmed. However, they would become laborers in Israel. This might seem harsh, but don't forget the ancient Near Eastern context. Oh, man, there it is. That's why they're getting this right. The ancient Near East. There it is, the ANE. When the Ammonites surrounded one of the cities of Israel, they required every citizen to gouge out one of their eyes as a term of peace and surrender. 1 Samuel 11. This is why the neighboring nations considered the Hebrew kings to be merciful kings. 1 Kings 20. Because they did not gouge out people's eyes, so they were considered merciful. Unlike the Ammonites, who would gouge out people's eyes as a terms of peace and surrender. And, you know, of course, if you're going to gouge out one of someone's eyes, that means that every soldier that's fighting with one eye, they're pretty much not going to be able to see from both ends, which means that people could defeat them easier. So, of course, if you could defeat someone easy, you would definitely be at peace with that person, wouldn't you? Makes sense. This peace treaty was not offered to these 7 people groups in Canaan. Example, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as Deuteronomy 20:16 makes explicit. This is probably because the Jews originally came to King Sihon of the Ammonites with words of peace, Deuteronomy 2:26. But the king was not willing to let them even pass through this land, Deuteronomy 2:30. How not willing? All right, let me shut up. However, those willing to abandon Canaan were probably spared. For instance, Rahab's entire family was spared from the judgment, Josh 2:13. That could preach by itself, and that pretty much preaches against this entire lesson. Yeah, they were guilty and they were this and that. Meanwhile, the Bible is showing like, hey, Rahab's family, okay, they were spared. Why? Because, hey, you know what? They did exactly what God was trying to get them to do for 400 years. To repent. To find 10 righteous people out of that sinful city. To repent. To stop doing what they're doing. And so they were spared. So God, you know, he killed those babies because they were born sinful. Well, what about Rahab? Was she born sinful? Because obviously God spared Rahab and them. So what? I guess what they were just one of the bunch that weren't guilty. Why weren't they guilty? Well, they weren't guilty because they were elected before anything even happened to be saved, and that way, you know. That's the reason why they were drawn out. No, that's not the narrative of this passage. The narrative of this passage is, even if you come from a really crappy, sinful nation and people and family or whatever, if you turn from your sin, hey, you're on God's team. I'm going to get you out. I'll go ahead and separate the sheep from the goats. Hey, you want to turn from your sins? You want to come on over, Rahab? Come on over. All right, for the rest of you guys that did not heed that warning, you're getting the same judgment. That is the message to the world. The world. Turn from your sin. I don't care what kind of pagan culture you come out of. Turn. I will forgive you. I didn't predestine you from to just go ahead and die because I wanted to just sadistically glorify myself. Like that's not the narrative. It's not the narrative. The remaining Canaanites were killed because they chose to stay. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this out because this is just basically a bunch of cliff notes. You know, you guys could definitely check out for yourself. It just goes into all this extra stuff that I'm like, well, someone could just look at this stuff on their own time. literally. God has the right to judge as the author and sustainer of life. And it has a little. So that's their. This is their summary, I guess. It says all people are going to die at some point. The question is not that they will die. Instead, the question is, when will they die? God takes life. God takes every life in the end. This is called death. Since God is the author and sustainer of life, he has rights over human life that we do not. Job said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away." It is God's business how and when he decides to end our life, not ours. We live here on earth, not as a right, but by the mercy of God. And also, God, you want to know why? It's because he wants a relationship with us. We have a sense of this when we say that a doctor was playing God by receiving a patient in a hospital. Therefore, God wasn't evil by ordering the destruction of the Canaanites. He was merely acting on the prerogatives that rightly belong to him as the author and sustainer of life. I have nothing else to say. I could say more, but I don't at this point. I don't have anything else to say. I don't. Pretty sure people are, having some fun in the chat as usual. This will probably be the most interesting chat I'll read after, this whole thing is over, because I can't wait to see what people have said. Oh man, there's so much more I could say. So much more. I don't know, but maybe I'll save it for another time. I know that KW recently made a video about how regeneration precedes faith, and and again, I don't understand how that happens. Like I said, that's like having someone. That's like me saying to everyone, "Hey, my girlfriend and I are engaged," and they ask me, "Oh, when did you propose?" I was like, "Oh, I didn't propose yet." Well, how can you be engaged if you didn't propose yet? Like that, that doesn't make sense, you know. Uh, maybe I'll do a continuation on this. I don't know, maybe, but I just wanted to show you that little bit that this is the position of like Jews and early Christians, Old and New Testament, on babies. This is what they thought of babies. I can't find one passage where it says, you know what, there are certain babies that are damned and predetermined to eternal death. And, he has some babies in hell for his own glory. I can't find one passage where it says that, God glorifies himself. Nope. I do find passages where it says that people give God glory. That's a relational thing. Oh, we keep running into that word now, don't we? Relational. Seems that that's what the Bible is just totally made up of. A relationship, a union. Kind of like a marriage, the last thing that that happens in the book of Revelation. The last thing that the Spirit and the bride say to the world: come to me, come on, guys. Whoever is predetermined to be willing to take the water of life freely. Like, no. If he is willing, uh, let him come and take the water of life freely. Willing, freely, free will. Can't get around that. Philemon 1:14, that as well, by his own free will, right? That's what it says in the NASB. Anyway, so let's see. All right. Anyway, so I got to be at work in another hour and a half. So gonna go ahead and end this video out. It's 8:52 right now. So I hope that this has been you know, I hope this has been really enlightening, and maybe I'll continue these things. I don't know. Maybe we'll dig into stuff, because what I'm really trying to do is continue my series on worship and sacred space and all that other stuff. So I'm probably just gonna go like back and forth. I'll probably like do another lesson and then like another response and setting the record straight. I'll probably just go back and forth. And maybe eventually in the future I'll go to like, just open chat hangouts and things. But for right now, I really just want to go back on the lessons and probably like a response video here or there. Definitely check out the two videos in the description section, y'all. Can y'all please definitely check them out? It's my personal renderings of what I thought about and what I think about Calvinism. And like I said, please leave a comment on the video. The second version, I would like everyone to go to 57 minutes and just let it play. So, people could see like, okay, these are the problems that people have with like Calvinists. And I think the other thing I'm going to do is perhaps I'll go in and show how when you look at Calvinism, unfortunately, it does stem from Gnosticism. And I'm not talking about, I mean, I'm not talking about indirectly. I'm talking like a lot of times like directly. Some of the things I seen was scary. I was like, dang, like you can't get around this. But anyway, all right. I will see y'all. Peace and blessings. And yeah, peace and blessings. Okay.